Human reason has the peculiar fate in one species of its cognitions that it is burdened with questions which it cannot dismiss, since they are given to it as problems by the nature of reason itself, but which it also cannot answer, since they transcend every capacity of human reason. Reason falls into this perplexity through no fault of its own. It begins from principles whose use is unavoidable in the course of experience, and at the same time sufficiently warranted by it. With these principles, it rises, as its nature also requires, ever higher, to more remote conditions. But since it becomes aware in this way that its business must always remain incomplete, because the questions never cease, reason sees itself necessitated to take refuge in principles that overstep all possible use in experience, and yet seem so unsuspicious that even ordinary common sense agrees with them. But it thereby falls into obscurity and contradictions from which it can indeed surmise that it must somewhere be proceeding on the ground of hidden errors. But it cannot discover them, for the principles on which it is proceeding, since they surpass the bounds of all experience, no longer recognize any touchstone of experience. The battlefield of these endless controversies is called metaphysics. There was a time when metaphysics was called the queen of all the sciences, and if the will be taken for the deed, it deserved this title of honor on account of the preeminent importance of its object. Now, in accordance with the fashion of the age, the queen proves despised on all sides, and the matron, outcast and forsaken, mourns like Hecuba, greatest of all by race and birth. Now I am cast out, powerless. In the beginning, under the administration of the dogmatists, her rule was despotic. Yet because her legislation still retained traces of ancient barbarism, this rule gradually degenerated through internal wars into complete anarchy. And the skeptics, a kind of nomads who abhor all permanent cultivation of the soil, shattered civil unity from time to time. But since there were fortunately only a few of them, they could not prevent the dogmatists from continually attempting to rebuild, though never according to a plan unanimously accepted among themselves. Once, in recent times, it even seemed as though an end would be put to all these controversies, and the lawfulness of the competing claims would be completely decided through a certain physiology of the human understanding by the famous Locke. But it turned out that although the birth of the purported queen was traced to the rabble of common experience, and her pretensions would therefore have been rightly rendered suspicious, nevertheless, she still asserted her claims, because in fact this genealogy was attributed to her falsely. Thus, metaphysics fell back into the same old worm-eaten dogmatism, and thus into the same position of contempt out of which the science was to have been extricated. Now, after all paths, as we persuade ourselves, have been tried in vain, what rules is tedium and complete indifferentism, the mother of chaos and night in the sciences, but at the same time also the origin, or at least the prelude, of their incipient transformation and enlightenment, when through ill-equipped effort they have become obscure, confused, useless. For it is pointless to affect indifference with respect to such inquiries to whose object human nature cannot be indifferent. Moreover, however much they may think to make themselves unrecognizable by exchanging the language of the schools for a popular style, these so-called indifferentists, to the extent that they think anything at all, always unavoidably fall back into metaphysical assertions which they yet professed so much to despise. Nevertheless, this indifference occurring amid the flourishing of all sciences and directed precisely at those sciences whose results, if such are to be had at all, we could least do without, is a phenomenon deserving our attention and reflection. This is evidently the effect not of the thoughtlessness of our age, but of its ripened power of judgment, which will no longer be put off with illusory knowledge, and which demands that reason should take on anew the most difficult of all its tasks, namely, that of self-knowledge, and to institute a court of justice by which reason may secure its rightful claims while dismissing all its groundless pretensions, and this not by mere decrees, but according to its own internal and unchangeable laws. And this court is none other than the critique of pure reason itself.